We're going to be reading Eicha on Tisha B'Av, but the word Eicha appears two other places, both of which we were going to be reading now, between now and Tisha B'Av. Shlosha Nisnabu, says the Medrash, Shloshu Nisabnu Beloshon Eicha. The word Eicha appears in the language of three prophets: Moshe, Yeshayahu, and Yirmiyahu. Where do we see Eicha by Moshe? Pay attention to this week's parsha when you're reading Kriyas HaTorah. Eicha esal levadi, masachem torchachem verivchem. Moshe Rabbeinu says, how could I handle this huge burden? Yeshayahu Omar, that's going to be in the Haftorah of Shabbat Chazon, it starts Chazon Yeshayahu. Eicha hayta lizona kirya nemana. Eicha, how could it be, this Jewish people, like a harlot? Yirmiyahu Amar Eicha yashva badad. 3 times that word Eicha appears in 3 different Nevi'im. Amar Rabbi Levi, says the Medrash on that. Mashal lematruna shahayu la gimel shushvinin. There was a princess, important woman, and she had 3 maidservants. She had 3 attendants. Echad ra osa b'shalvasa. One of those attendants saw this important woman when she was in her glory, in calmness. Echad b'pachazuta. One of them saw her when she was reckless. And echad b'navlusa. And one of them saw the woman, one of her attendants saw her when she was in her degradation, in her disgrace. So we have a mashal. Moshe Rabbeinu saw the Jewish people b'shalvusam. They were calm. They were very calm. They were at the top of the world. Yeshayahu saw them eicha haisa lizona, disgrace. The Jewish people were in a state of disgrace. And Yirmiyahu saw them eicha yashva badad. They were Yeshayahu saw them in recklessness. Zona represents reckless behavior. Sleeping around, reckless behavior. That's how Yeshayahu saw the Jewish people. And Eicha saw them, they were in complete disgrace. So, this is a connection of those 3 words, Eicha. And we need to understand, if the Tanakh uses it all 3 times and Chazal connect them, so there has to be some kind of a connection with those 3 words. One other Mamar Chazal, famous Gemara in Ksubis, where Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is basically heading out of Jerusalem in the time of the Churban, and he's riding on a donkey, and he sees a woman, a young lady, collecting barley seeds from the dung of the animals. And when she saw him, she covered up, and she asked, Rebbe, please give me parnasa. I have no parnasa. You see, I've got to collect barley seeds from the dung of the donkey. And he wanted to know, who are you? I'm the daughter of Nakdimon ben Gurion. Nakdimon ben Gurion was one of the wealthiest people in Jerusalem, the 3 wealthiest people, and they were trying to keep the city alive and functioning during the siege, and only because the wild-eyed extremists burned all of the storehouses because they wanted the Jews to fight. We got to fight those Romans. We're not going to just sit here. So he lost all his money, and here's where she is. Listen to what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says when he found out who she was. Bacha Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai v'amar, Ashrechem Yisrael, praiseworthy are you, the Jewish people. Bisman she'osim ritzono shel makom ein kol uma v'loshon sholetes b'hem. When you do the will of God, you're on top of the world. Nobody can touch you. Ubisman she'ein osim ritzono shel makom, but when you violate the will of God, masurim biyad uma shpela, you're given over to the lowliest nation, and not only to the lowliest nation, the dung of the lowliest nation. So the Maral, but many of them unfortunately say, wait a minute, what's going on here? I understand Ashrechem Yisrael, you're praiseworthy when you're listening to the word of God. We're on the top of the world. We run the world. The anti-Semites know it better than we do. We run the world. But when we're not doing the will of God, we're in the dung heaps. That's ashreichem. That's praiseworthy. We understand the praiseworthy when we're at the top, but what's praiseworthy about being at the bottom? So, if you pay attention to the Haftorah, Chazon Yeshayahu, Chazon implies a clear vision. One of the things that we lack nowadays is clarity. It's a little this, it's a little that. We don't want to take a stand. Clarity. Chazon Yeshayahu, clarity. What's the clarity? Banim hayu. You are children of God and you violated, you rebelled. Banim lo emun bam. You're children of God and we have no confidence in you. And Rabbi Meir in the Gemara says, wait a minute. So we're pretty lousy, we're behaving pretty lousily. And you keep calling us banim. Banim, banim, banim. We are children of God. So everybody understands that we're children of, that God views us as His children when we're doing the right thing. The chiddush here is that even when in the time of Churban, that's Chazon Yeshayahu, in the time of Churban, everything's being destroyed, we're still banim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's an inseparable connection between the Jewish people and God, even in the worst situations. Banim lo emun bam, we don't have any fidelity. God says, you're still my children. You have to study Jewish history for the last 2,000 years to appreciate the inexplicable connection, the inexplicable existence, endurance of the Jewish people. Study Jewish history for 2,000 years. We're just downtrodden and thrown around and killed and slaughtered, and yet we're still around. That demonstrates that there's an inseparable connection with God. That as bad as we are and as bad as the situation is, God is always there pulling us out of the fire. But it also shows the eternal inseparable connection we have with God. It's an amazing thing that as hard as the Jewish people try to assimilate, it never works. The individual can get lost. But the nation, we're just still around. We're always there. We're always connected. We're always learning Torah. We're always keeping mitzvos. An eternal, inseparable connection. Banim atem l'Hashem Elokeichem. Sometimes we don't behave like children, but we have to appreciate the fact that we are. One of the things that Abraham Twersky likes to talk about when you give Musar, right? It's we have to appreciate we're royalty, and royalty doesn't behave in a disgraceful way. And one of the problems is that we sometimes lose sight of the royalty, and we behave in ways that's not appropriate for royalty. That's Banim Atem L'Hashem Elokeichem. Keeping that in mind, keeping an awareness of that inseparable connection that we have with God and that God has with us. If you really live that, if you really walk that talk, it modifies your behavior. Your behavior is different. The Kabbalistic literature, the Vilna Gaon actually brings, that talks about how the months of the year are connected with the Shvatim, and the names of the Shvatim also reflect the personality of the month. And Chodesh Av is connected with Shimon in the way that it plays out. And Shimon, if you listen, and you'll see in a minute, no pun intended, if you listen carefully, you hear the word lishmoa in the word Shimon. Okay? That the month of Av is keneged shmiya, keneged hearing. Now, what is the mechanism of hearing versus seeing? It's an amazing thing. If you've heard of the idea that if you see one little tiny piece of the elephant, one piece at a time, you don't know what it is. Seeing requires you to see the whole picture, all at once. That's Re'iyah. Re'iyah requires to see everything. If all you do is you see a little slice, you're not getting the picture right. So Re'iyah has to be the whole picture. Shmiya is exactly the opposite. If you hear all the sounds at once, it's a cacophony. Shmiya is putting together one discrete sound wave after the other. And then you got to put it together. So Shmiya is putting together disparate, discrete elements and getting a context out of them. It requires an intellectual activity very different than Re'iyah. I was quite shocked at the research on this. Everybody knows that if you're driving and you're talking on your cell phone, that's bad. That's talking. But so what did we do? We put in hands-free speakers into the car so we can talk on the phone while we're driving. Research showed that didn't help a lot. That a huge percentage of accidents happen while people are talking on their cell phone with hands-free. What's the explanation? And they did research on it. And talking to somebody who's sitting in the passenger seat did not generate accidents. Talking on a hands-free cell phone did. Why? Because in order to talk to somebody when you don't see them, you have to think about them. You have to imagine them. Shmiya requires imagination. It's not just there, it requires connecting dots. It requires an intellectual conceptualization. So the Jewish people, the Meraglim came back in Chodesh Av. Just parenthetically, Chodesh Tammuz is Reuven, which is seeing. The Meraglim's sin is they saw what they want to see. But Shmiya, Chodesh Av, the Jewish people heard wrong. They didn't hear correctly. They heard the words and they didn't put the dots together. And that's destruction. Churban is to take something apart. The proper hearing is you got to put the pieces together. You look at Jewish history and you got to put all the pieces together. You got to see the dots, how they all connect. The Churban started because of the Jewish people's crying over what the Meraglim said because they didn't hear it correctly. They didn't put the dot, they didn't connect the dots. We're mourning. This is always a problem. The Beis HaMikdash was destroyed 2,000 years ago. One could easily say, come on guys, get a life. And the truth is, that's correct. And you have to realize what we're really mourning is not about an event of 2,000 years ago. We're mourning about Churban, which exists today, contemporary, because we're not living the connection of the dots. We're not sensitized to the connections that exists between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're not living the fact that we're banim. That is the explanation of the Ashreichem. We have a connection with God, and that connection has consequences. When we do the will of God, we're at the top of the world. But because of that deep connection, Ashreichem, the praiseworthiness is that when we have that connection, and when we mess up, that connection requires destruction. It requires deterioration. You have a very, very fancy, again, by the women we could talk about a white wedding dress. We'll talk about, you guys have a very expensive, you have $120 fancy white shirt. And you get a stain on it that can't come out with dry cleaning. What's the value of that shirt? Nothing. But you have your flannel, dungarees, and a little paint spills on it and nothing happened. When something is so elevated and so precious, the littlest infringement is destruction. We're such a high level people that the slightest infringement creates destruction. That's Ashreichem. It's because we're on such a high level. Because our shirt is so expensive, that's why a little infringement destroys it. So it's Ashreichem that we're at the top, And it's part of the praiseworthiness that if we mess up, we're at the bottom. What is Eicha? What does the word mean? Eicha, how could this be? It's an it's a word of amazement. When Chazal connect Moshe Rabbeinu's Eicha and Yeshayahu Hanavi's Eicha and Yirmiyahu's Eicha, the attendants of that woman, they saw her at the highest level. Shalvusa, wow, such an amazing woman. And then they saw when she was reckless, not behaving properly. And then they saw when she was completely degraded. It's the same woman. We're saying it's an amazing connection. Sometimes we could be at the top. Sometimes we behave recklessly. And sometimes we're destroyed. It's the same Eicha. How could this be? And the answer is all three of them are true simultaneously. It's not part of the materialistic world. It doesn't work like that. There's a transcendent spiritual connection that the Jewish people have, spiritual reality, transcendent reality that the Jewish people have that's manifested with this Eicha. How is it possible for one nation to be at the top, to be reckless, to be degraded? Eicha, how could it be? That's the unique nature of of the Klal Yisrael, the unique nature of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And these days is when we have to appreciate that we don't live it, and we have to relive it, and we have to think about the fact that, hey, what's been going on for the last 2,000 years, and we're still here. And Baruch Hashem, in our generation, it's a little easier because we see the fulfillment of all of the prophecies. You're going to be reading these 3 weeks. You've been reading about the prophecies of destruction. Please pay attention after Tisha B'Av to the 7 haftarahs that we're going to read. And I always say that when you read these haftarahs, you could easily get mixed up between reading prophecy and reading newspaper articles, because it's describing exactly what we're living through. And it could be that now, our connection to God got so diminished, the only way HaKadosh Baruch Hu can maintain it is by showing, okay guys, we're putting you back on the top. We're not there yet. There's still a lot to fix. But the miracles that we're seeing today, we have to appreciate those miracles. Eicha, how could such things happen? Perel Wine always says there's no comebacks in history, except for the Jewish people. You look at the Jewish people, circa September 1945. Everybody's ready to throw in the towel. Game is over. A third of the people are wiped out, and the whole Torah center of the world is wiped out. So, if you're a believing Jew, you got to say, whoa, what just happened? We have nothing left. And of course, if you're a secular Jew, the last thing you want to do is be Jewish. We once had a student, we had two brothers and a sister, who came to us from New Zealand, all Balei Tshuva. And we were talking, we're like, well, how did your father end up in New Zealand? It was after the Holocaust. And he wanted to get as far away from anything Jewish as he possibly could. God has a sense of humor. All three of kids became frum. Okay? But that was his motivation. After the Holocaust, we don't want to have anything to do with our Judaism. Just leave us alone. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us a state and starts bringing the exiles back, fulfillment of all the prophecies. Amazing. Eicha, it's a pliya, it's a language of Pele. Because it's not part of the natural world. It's something unique about the Jewish people. A unique connection. Now we're going to have Shabbat Chazon. So, we have Shabbos Shuvah and Shabbos Hagadol and Shabbos Chazon. But Shabbos Chazon is like, you understand Shabbos Shuvah right before Rosh Hashanah, Shabbos Hagadol before Pesach. Why do we have a special Shabbos Chazon, just because the Haftorah starts with Chazon Yeshayahu? Shabbos is the time when, as disconnected as we might be from God during the week, Shabbos is the time, if you do Shabbos right, you're connected with God. It's one of the reasons why the non-Jew's not allowed to keep Shabbos, because the Medrash says that Shabbos is our unique, intimate connection with God. Nobody's allowed to mix in. Pay attention to the Haftorah. Chodshechem u'moadechem sona nafshi. Besides, earlier on it says that God hates our sacrifices because they're hypocritical. And then he says, I also hate Chodshechem, your Rosh Chodesh celebrations, u'moadechem, your Yom Tov celebrations, sona nafshi. God doesn't like it. You know what's missing from that? What happened to Shabbos? It doesn't say that about Shabbos. Shabbos is always, there's always connection on Shabbos. We can somehow or other do Yom Tov wrong, we can do Rosh Chodesh wrong, but Shabbos is always connected. It's amazing Gemara. Afilu oved avodah zara kidor enosh. The Jewish people are worshiping idols like the generation of Enosh, the most idol-worshipping generation. If they keep Shabbos, mochlin lo, HaKadosh Baruch Hu forgives all the sins. Shabbos creates that intimate connection that we have to realize that's the whole purpose of reversing the galut, reversing the exile, reversing destruction. Destruction, churban, is separation. Binyan, we want to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. Got to put the pieces together. But the pieces means a connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're always banim. And we have to behave like banim. And sometimes we need a Shabbos to just feel that connection if you do Shabbos right. Chazon Yeshayahu is clarity. And Eicha, how could this be? But we have to appreciate, how could this be? How could the Jewish people be on such a high level, a low level? How could it be? And we have to say, but it is. And therefore we have to appreciate the connection that exists throughout Jewish history with all of the events and the connection that indicates that we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's ultimately the reversal of the Churban. That's ultimately how we can turn a Tisha B'Av as a day of mourning, as it says in all the sources, is that Moed, it will ultimately be a day of rejoicing. But it's up to us to know how to observe Tisha B'Av properly, not to mourn about just what happened 2,000 years ago. But you'll see in the Kinos are going to describe destruction throughout Jewish history. That's the Kinos. Because we have to realize it's all connected. It's all connected to our disconnection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when we realize the disconnection, that can motivate us to focus on the connection. And that's ultimately the binyan, ultimately the rebuilding, is the connection we need to manifest and really feel. Banim atem l'Hashem Elokechem. We are unique children to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We have to behave that way.